Every man has two paths laid out before him, the easy road paved with self-interest, and the difficult winding path that demands a price for every step of honor. For men like the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club, that path was always shrouded in shadow. They were not crusaders. They were not preachers. They were outlaws, riding the edge of society, but beneath the hardened leather and the cold stare was a code far older and more absolute than the statutes of any state house. They called it the Iron Rule. Vengeance is necessary, but redemption is mandatory. Our story finds the Iron Saints years after a terrible, scarring betrayal. Their former treasurer, a man named Silas, had done the unforgivable. He stole the club's emergency funds, money specifically earmarked for the families of fallen members, and vanished, leaving a trail of ruin and legal chaos. The hunt for Silas was the sole focus of the Saints for almost a decade, an obsession that drove them deeper into the shadows, turning them from a disciplined brotherhood into a desperate, focused engine of retribution. The leader of the Iron Saints, the man they called Goliath, bore the weight of this chase like a physical chain. Goliath was an anti-hero defined. He was massive, built like a fortress, with a stare that could turn coal to diamond. He had enforced the Iron Rule with merciless efficiency, ensuring the club survived every storm, every bust, every rival ambush. But Silas's betrayal had been personal, a poison that had tainted the pure spirit of their brotherhood. Goliath had vowed, publicly and privately, that when he found Silas, the reckoning would be swift, absolute, and terminal. The breakthrough came in the desolate coastal town of Haven's End, a forgotten fishing village swallowed by the Atlantic mist. A broken contact, a desperate whisper from the underworld, pointed to Silas living under an assumed identity, working a meaningless, low-paying job to stay invisible. Goliath and the core of the Iron Saints, Anvil, the vice president and club strategist, and Preacher, the moral compass with blood on his hands, rode out immediately. This was the end of the line, the conclusion to a decade of suffering. They located Silas in a cramped two-room shack overlooking the grey, churning ocean. Goliath waited until midnight, the fog thick and cold, before moving. This was not a raid. This was an execution, carried out under the solemn silence of the Iron Rule. Goliath kicked the door in, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent night. Silas was not the man they remembered. The slick, arrogant confidence was gone. He was thin, gaunt, his hands rough from honest work, and he was not alone. Huddled in the corner, clutching a worn teddy bear, was a girl, no older than 7, her eyes wide with terror. "Goliath," Silas whispered, rising slowly, his hands up, instantly recognizing the judgment standing before him. "It's been a long time." Goliath's hand was already on the grip of his customized .45, the metal cold and comforting. The betrayal, the years of hard riding, the families who had suffered, it all demanded this moment. He was finally standing before his vengeance. 10 years, Goliath growled, the sound ripping from his chest. 10 years you ran while our brother's children went without. You stole from the dead, Silas. That puts you beneath the dirt. "Wait," Silas pleaded, taking a step forward, shielding the girl with his body. "I know what I did. I won't beg for my life. But that is Maya. She's not part of this. She's my daughter. Her mother died last year. She's all I have left." The sight of the girl stopped Goliath cold. The Iron Saints had a second unspoken rule. Children are sacred ground. The Iron Rule demanded Silas's death. The unspoken rule, the code of true outlaws who protect the innocent, demanded the protection of the child. The two codes collided in Goliath's soul, generating an agonizing moral earthquake. Anvil, ever the pragmatist, moved to secure the room, his eyes assessing the situation, not the man. "Goliath, the money's gone. He probably blew it years ago. We take him now. It's what we came for." Preacher, the man who knew the true definition of a high cost, stepped closer to the girl. He saw not a criminal's dependent, but a life about to be shattered by the justice they were about to deliver. "Goliath," Preacher's voice was low, reasoned. "If we kill him, what happens to her? She goes into the system. She pays the price for his sins." Goliath looked at Maya. She wasn't just scared, she was clinging to her father's legs, trusting him, dependent on him. This was not the arrogant traitor who had broken their code. This was a father, desperately trying to protect his child. This was redemption, not earned, but forced upon Silas by the universe, a silent contract demanding a new life in exchange for the old one. "Where is the money, Silas?" Goliath demanded, his voice trembling with the internal conflict. Silas dropped his guard. "It was the wrong choice, Goliath. I was desperate. I blew it on a bad deal, trying to double it, trying to escape. It's gone. Everything is gone but her." Goliath lowered the .45, but did not holster it. The path of vengeance was clear, direct, and satisfying. The path of redemption, protecting the child, sparing the villain, carrying the burden of unfinished justice, was painful, messy, and infinitely more demanding. It was the only way to prove their club was not just a gang of thugs, but men capable of the hardest choice. He had to choose between revenge and redemption. And for the anti-hero, redemption is often the ultimate act of sacrifice. Goliath's choice hung in the stale air of the shack, heavier than the silence. He had dedicated 10 years of his life and the resources of the Iron Saints to tracking Silas down, only to have the ultimate prize, vengeance, tainted by the presence of an innocent child. The code was absolute, but the Iron Rule had to serve justice, not just raw emotion. To kill Silas in front of his daughter would break the sacred ground of innocence, turning the Saints into the very villains they swore not to be. "You don't get off that easy, Silas," Goliath said, his voice now low and dangerous, stripped of the anger but filled with cold authority. He holstered the gun, a decision that felt more painful than pulling the trigger. "You owe the club, but your debt now is to that girl. You live, Silas, but you live under a new kind of sentence, the sentence of redemption." Silas stared, incomprehension warring with relief. He had expected death, not a fate worse than it. A life of constant grinding fear, knowing the Iron Saints could return at any moment. Goliath turned to Anvil and Preacher. "We have a choice. We can walk away, leaving a soft target for the next opportunist, or we can enforce our justice with a shield, not a sword." The Iron Saints were not just focused on Silas. They were focused on a far greater, more immediate threat to the region. Haven's End and the surrounding poor coastal towns were being preyed upon by a ruthless human trafficking ring that utilized the deserted docks and fog-shrouded coves. This ring, known only as the Syndicate, was moving children and desperate families through the area, exploiting the lack of police presence and the general isolation. The local authorities were either too inept or too corrupt to stop it. The Saints had been tracking the Syndicate for months, compiling dossiers, mapping routes. They had delayed their righteous war against the Syndicate because the hunt for Silas was paramount. But now, in the shack, Goliath saw the true path to redemption, not for Silas, but for the Iron Saints themselves. They had to choose a greater evil to fight, a more pressing injustice to correct. Protecting Maya meant protecting the vulnerable community that surrounded her. "The Syndicate," Goliath announced, his gaze sweeping over the shack. "We finish this here, but we finish it with them. Silas will pay his debt by helping us dismantle the ring. He knows the docks, he knows the shadows. He lives, but he rides for us." Silas didn't hesitate. The choice between his own death and a dangerous path that preserved his daughter's future was no choice at all. "I'll do it," he rasped. "Whatever you need. Just keep Maya safe." The next 48 hours were a blur of intense planning. The Saints set up a makeshift command center in an abandoned cannery, utilizing Silas's intimate knowledge of the coast's hidden pathways and safe houses. This was outlaw intervention at its most refined, using criminal expertise to defeat a greater, more insidious criminality. Preacher and Anvil, the strategist and the moralist, focused the club's energy. They didn't seek open confrontation with the Syndicate. They sought surgical strikes against the organization's infrastructure. They began by intercepting a scheduled transport, not with guns blazing, but with a highly coordinated ambush designed to scatter the operators and free the vulnerable cargo. A dozen frightened, displaced immigrants without a single shot fired. The Syndicate immediately recognized the professional disruption. Their leader, a man named the Collector, a ghost of the coast with terrifying influence, sent a chilling message: interference will be met with extermination. Goliath knew they were now the target. The Saints' final stand was not going to be against a rival club or a police sting. It was going to be against a force that trafficked in human lives. They were making the anti-hero's ultimate pivot, sacrificing their own safety and closure for the purity of the cause.
The climax arrived on a foggy night at the main abandoned freight pier. The Collector was scheduled to move a large group of captive children. The Saints had less than an hour. Silas, armed with nothing but courage and his local knowledge, acted as the spotter. Moving through the shadows, marking the Syndicate's armed guards, Goliath led the charge. This time, there was no deliberation, only deadly speed and focused intent.
He was fighting for Maya, for the ghost of his club's honor, and for every innocent life crushed by the criminal system. The confrontation was savage, a fight in the dark against men who recognized no code. In the chaos, Silas was cornered by the Collector himself, a hulking figure with a cold, dead stare. The Collector recognized Silas's betrayal of his former life. A rat trying to play hero, the Collector sneered, raising a heavy-caliber rifle. Silas, knowing his life was forfeit but his daughter was safe, didn't run. He drew the Syndicate's fire, allowing Goliath the critical second needed to flank the Collector. Goliath moved like a striking viper. He didn't execute the Collector. He incapacitated him with brutal, precise force, disabling him for the authorities who were now finally closing in, having been fed anonymous tips by Judge. But Silas had taken the bullet. Goliath rushed to his side. Silas was fading, lying on the cold concrete, looking up at the man who was supposed to kill him, but who had chosen to grant him life, and then a redemption worth dying for. "Maya," Silas whispered, his last breath a plea. Goliath nodded, a massive hand gripping Silas's shoulder. "She's safe. She'll be safe. You paid the debt, Silas. You chose redemption." Silas died, knowing his final act was one of genuine honor. The Saints had broken every law in the process, becoming heroes in the darkness while cementing their status as outlaws in the light. They had saved the children, dismantled the ring, and achieved a redemption that revenge could never offer. As the police sirens wailed in the distance, Goliath and the Iron Saints melted back into the fog, leaving behind the captive Syndicate members and the freed children, the evidence of their righteous violence clear, yet the identity of the anti-heroes obscured. Goliath had lost a decade to vengeance, but in the end, he had chosen the harder, more honorable path. He was still an outlaw, but he was a man redeemed.